Welcome to Crime and Corruption, where we explore the stories that live at the crossroads of sport and society. Today, we're diving into the deep, complicated, and sometimes dangerous world where soccer meets corruption, politics, and organized crime. We'll be talking match fixing, narco football, FIFA scandals, and the political influence behind major tournaments.
Yeah, this is going to be a big one today. The more you dive in, the more you see that corruption in soccer isn't really random at all. It's structured, global, and tied into how the sport operates.
Exactly. And sometimes what looks like a scandal is actually part of a much bigger international network.
Same on the political side. Governments have used soccer for legitimacy, diplomacy, nationalism, and sometimes to mask darker realities.
All right, let's jump in. Scarlett, you're going to start us off with one of the most revealing match-fixing scandals in modern football.
Today, I want to talk about one of the most revealing match-fixing scandals in modern football and what it tells us about corruption in sports. I'm focusing on the Italian match-fixing crisis known as calcio messe. What's fascinating is that this wasn't just Italian players or clubs acting alone. This scandal was part of a much bigger global network. When the scandal broke out in around 2011, many people assumed it was just another Italian problem. But this wasn't just simply local corruption. It was a transnational criminal system connecting Italy to betting across Europe and Asia, especially Singapore. Most of the manipulation happened in Italy's lowest leagues, where players were underpaid or nearing the end of their careers. They were easy targets. Fixers approached them with very specific instructions, not necessarily to lose, but to control tiny details, such as a halftime score or a late goal, things that were much harder to detect. Once arrangements were in place, the money flowed through illegal betting markets. Syndicates in Asia would place massive bets on manipulated outcomes. One fixed situation in a tiny Italian match could generate huge payouts. Small Italian groups doing the groundwork and a few key brokers connected them to the international crime. These brokers were the backbones of the operation. One crucial point is that Italy isn't uniquely corrupt. It just has the right combination of vulnerabilities. Passionate football culture, unstable clubs, and huge international betting interests. Those vulnerabilities exist in many countries today. Ultimately, match fixing is not just about dishonest players. It's about networks, money, and coordinated power. It's organized crime using sports as a market. And if we treat it as just an individual behavior, we'll never fix it. Understanding those networks is the first step in protecting the game's integrity.
Honestly, the idea of brokers is so interesting. When you think about it, the corruption only works because these middlemen can connect the small local actors to huge international markets.
Yeah, and that in fact is the same structure that comes up in politics. You have these layers of people insulating the top decision makers, which at the end of the day makes accountability almost impossible.
In some of these cases, those networks go even deeper. Like in Colombia, where criminal money didn't just influence games, it reshaped an entire soccer culture. So let's shift to that. Today, we're heading to Colombia in the 1980s, a time when soccer wasn't just a game, but a mirror of the country's struggle between pride and corruption. Two writers, Sarah Krupp and Jamie Allen, help us to unpack how Pablo Escobar and his empire shaped what came to be called narco football. Sarah Krupp writes that without drug money, Colombian soccer didn't exist. That line tells us everything we need to know. Colombia's beloved game was both elevated and poisoned by cartel money. Escobar's billions, as Jamie Allen puts it, built housing, schools, churches, parks, and football pitches for the impoverished masses of Medellin. To many in the barrios, he wasn't just a drug lord. He was a benefactor, someone who gave them joy and hope through soccer. But, as Allen reminds us, football proved to be the perfect vehicle for money laundering. Clubs like Atlético Nacional became laundromats for cocaine profits, even as they won titles like the 1989 Copa Libertadores. The line between philanthropy and manipulation blurred entirely. Yet what began as national pride turned quickly into tragedy. Krupp points to the murder of defender Andrés Escobar after the 1994 World Cup as the symbolic collapse of this era. She writes that people became less interested in who pulled the trigger and more interested in what kind of society would lead to the murder of a soccer player for one mistake on the field. Allen puts it bluntly, the long hand of the cartels could manipulate whoever they pleased, slowly extinguishing the light of hope that football had provided for many. And he concludes with, narco football died with the two Escobars. When Pablo Escobar was murdered in 1993, and Andrés Escobar was murdered in 1994. Together, Krupp and Allen paint a portrait of a nation where soccer became a battleground for morality. It was pride, hope, joy, but at a devastating price.
What's wild about this is how similar the logic is to the Italian case. vulnerable players and clubs combined with powerful criminal organizations.
Along with this, it's how corruption actually boosted the sport before it destroyed it. That pattern will show up again in FIFA.
Yeah, right. When the system rewards corruption, like in Libertadores, as you said, everyone gets sucked into it. Which brings us right to our next topic, Sofia's.
Yeah, I got to take a look at FIFA corruption and how it shaped World Cup bidding. Once I started reading my sources, the biggest thing that stood out was that corruption in FIFA isn't just a few bad people making decisions. According to Bourdreau and his co-authors, it's built into how FIFA is structured, so the system essentially encourages corruption. FIFA structure makes corruption easy. It's technically a non-profit, but in reality, it operates like a global monopoly. It controls the World Cup, sponsorships, TV rights, and billions of dollars. But there's no real accountability for the president or the executive committee. The lack of oversight creates a perfect environment for bribery. Along with this, the corruption is systematic. It's not about individuals. The article talked about how corruption isn't solved by picking right people. It's an institutional process. Replace everyone in leadership and the incentives for corruption still exist. In 2015, there was a scandal. The U.S. Department of Justice dropped a 47-count indictment accusing officials of taking $150 million in bribes over 2 decades. 7 officials were arrested in Zurich. 2 generations of FIFA officials essentially turned the institution into a corrupt enterprise. This all directly ties into World Cup bidding. Both Russia 2018 and Qatar 2022 were surrounded by accusations of bribery and vote buying. One Russian energy company reportedly paid $80 million during their bid. Countries had strong incentives to offer bribes, and FIFA executives had strong incentives to accept them. Countries also stayed quiet because FIFA can punish for interference. For example, in 2011, they banned Belize for political interference. This sent a message, challenge FIFA, and you risk being kicked out of major tournaments. The costs, however, go far beyond FIFA. Brazil spent billions on the 2014 World Cup. Much of that money went to overpriced contracts and irregular spending. Several stadiums ended up becoming dead investments. Taxpayers paid for corruption that they never even benefited from. Overall, FIFA corruption reflects a system where money, power, and weak oversight intersect. And that affects everything from bidding to national economies.
Yeah, it's amazing how similar this sounds to political corruption in governments, which is exactly what Danny's section is all about.
Yup, you'll get to see the same incentives, such as weak oversight, big money, and big stakes.
Yeah, and again, governments absolutely take advantage of that structure. When people talk about soccer, they tend to think about goals, rivalries, and national pride. But underneath all of that, there's a massive political engine. An engine that governments have used for decades to shape public opinion, build legitimacy, and hide corruption. So I want to look at how soccer and politics merge. Soccer's political power comes from its scale. Billions of people watch the World Cup. For many nations, soccer is the one and only moment when the entire country unites. And governments know this and use this to their advantage. They use soccer for nation building, projecting strength and modernization. For distraction, pulling attention away from scandals and crises. And to soft power, using soccer diplomacy and hosting rights to boost global visibility. And these, in fact, aren't hypothetical. They show up in major historical events. And going to these events, we can see Qatar 2022 World Cup, where accusations of bribery and systemic FIFA governance failures. Qatar used the tournament to project global power and mass human rights concerns, even in the building of the stadiums in which the World Cup was played. Another famous crisis that took place in the FIFA was the Argentina 1978 World Cup. The military dictatorship used the World Cup as propaganda while torturing political dissidents near stadiums. In fact, one of the most controversial games in the football's history took place in this major tournament. On June 21st, 1978, Argentina beat it 6-0 against Peru in a game that qualified them for the next round. And in fact, Argentina ended up winning this World Cup against the Netherlands in the final. Another case of corruption was Russia 2018, where hosting allowed Russia to prevent and present modern, unified image despite international isolation. France took the victory in this case. Each case shows soccer being weaponized politically against the people who are in fact who built soccer. Scholars like Arnold show that weak oversight and concentrated power inside FIFA make political influence easy. Hosting rights become political capital. A well-priced bribe or alliance can have a massive payoff. These environments normalize corruption, turning it into a structural feature, not isolated scandals. It's never a one-time thing. One piece of primary evidence is a 2025 letter from the US senators to FIFA President Gianni Infantino, pressuring FIFA to address human trafficking concerns tied to the 2026 World Cup. Governments intervene when ethical failures threaten national reputation. This shows how deeply political soccer has become, and how states constantly influence FIFA's decisions. So, to grab my subtopic, in short, soccer is far more than a game. It's a political instrument used to build national identity, distract from crisis, and exert diplomatic influence. Weak governments inside FIFA made it fertile ground for corruption and manipulation. Therefore, understanding this political dimension helps explain why crime in soccer is part of a much bigger system where politics, power, and sport intersect.
So, as we wrap all this up, what really stands out is how each of our topics, even though they come from different regions and eras, ends up telling the same story about the global game. Soccer isn't just a sport, it's a reflection of structures that go far beyond the pitch.
And honestly, I think that's what surprised all of us. Whether we're talking about Italy's lower league fixers, Colombia's cartels, FIFA executives, or entire governments bidding for the World Cup, the common thread is the fact that the systems themselves create the conditions for corruption.
Right. We saw that a match-fixing scandal isn't just a few shady players. It's a network with brokers, intermediates, and international betting markets. The idea of network pop-ups everywhere. In Colombia, the network was the cartels. In FIFA, it's the executive committees and the people who orbit around it. In global politics, it's entire governments using soccer for legitimacy.
Yeah, and in fact, all those networks operate in the same way, through power, through money, and through the ability to turn soccer into a tool. What varies isn't the strategy they use, it's the scale. In Italy, it might be a single manipulated halftime score. In Qatar or Russia, it's an entire World Cup being used to project national identity. But the logic stays constant.
What's also important to note is the human side. Behind every case of corruption, there are people impacted. Players pressured into fixing matches, communities in Brazil paying billions for stadiums that they'd never get to use, citizens in Argentina cheering in stadiums while political prisoners were suffering nearby, and Colombians mourning Andrés Escobar. These stories aren't abstract, they're lived realities.
And that's exactly why studying corruption isn't about pointing fingers. It's about understanding why these systems keep repeating themselves. If we don't understand the structural reasons, such as lack of oversight, concentrated power, financial vulnerability, we can't hope to create impactful reform. The same problems will just continue to come up in new ways.
What gives me some hope in all of this is the fact that investigative works from journalists and scholars are helping expose these systems. The more people understand the mechanisms for corruption, the harder it becomes for networks to hide behind the complexity of international borders.
Yeah, and to add on that, soccer has the incredible ability to mobilize people, fans, communities, activists. When they push back, they can force change. And we've actually seen this with fan protests over the Super League attempt in Europe, with investigations into Qatar 2022, with demands for transparency inside FIFA, and with many more. The sport's global influence can be a tool for accountability too.
Exactly. If soccer can be used as a weapon by governments and criminal organizations, it can also be used as a platform by the public to demand something better. More transparency, more fairness, more integrity.
Because at the end of the day, soccer's power comes from the people who love it. It's the world's game, not because of FIFA, not because of the governments, but because billions of people care so deeply about it.
And that's why the stakes are so high. Corruption isn't just a threat to the sport, It's a threat to the communities who depend on it for joy, unity, and even as their identity.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, if we can understand the systems behind corruption, maybe we can imagine a version of global soccer where the game reflects the best parts of society, not the worst.
And that's a future worth talking about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into crime, politics, and the global game. This has been Crime and Corruption, and we'll see you next time.